So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this HEPI webinar. I'm Rose Stevenson. I'm the Director of Policy and Strategy at HEPI, the Higher Education Policy Institute. And I'm really delighted you're joining us today for this webinar examining a report that we've published today in partnership with Kaplan International Pathways and London Economics. And this report focuses on the economic benefits that international students bring to the UK. We've got an hour for today's webinar, and you will be not hearing very much from me at all, because my job is to move you on to the interesting bits. So logistics-wise, we're going to hear from our speakers. While that's happening, if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom. And for everyone, you can upvote the questions that you would like to be asked in the Q&A section. We normally switch on people's microphones, not cameras, just microphones, so you can ask your question directly. If you don't want to do that, or if you're in a noisy place, just put a note and I will read it out. Okay, logistics done. So we're going to kick off today by hearing about the findings of the report, and I'm really pleased that we're joined by Micah Halterbeck and James Cannings from London Economics, who wrote the report. So over to you both. Tell us what you found.
Perfect. Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. I'm going to be presenting with my colleague James. I'm going to talk us through the first half of the presentation. First of all, thank you very much to HEPI and Kaplan for funding this very important and very interesting piece of work. This is the fourth iteration of the study that we've undertaken alongside HEPI and Kaplan. And this fourth iteration is particularly crucial and timely, given everything going on in international higher education, all of the changes that are happening, all of the potential forthcoming changes from the immigration white paper from last year that are potentially coming in the next few months. So it's never boring in higher education, particularly international higher education. So we'll move on to the next slide. Perfect. So as I mentioned, this is the fourth iteration of this study that we've done. The most recent one we did just basically at the height of COVID for the 21-22 cohort of international students. Now this new study focuses for the first time on the 24-25 cohort of starters. So new students, first year students internationally that came into the UK in 24-25. 24-25 is, of course, a very important academic year. It was the first full academic year following the dependence ban. So the removal of the right for international postgrad taught students to bring in their adult or child dependents from January 2024. So 24-25 as the first full academic year when that dependence ban was imposed. We'll come back to that more on that later. We, again, as before, we consider the economic benefits and then the public purse costs for that cohort across the entire study duration for that cohort. So, for example, for an undergrad degree students, we'd look at 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27, so 3 years of study duration. So we look at the total economic benefits and costs over their study period in the UK in today's money terms. In terms of what specific benefits and costs we measure. So on the bottom left here, we list the economic benefit side. On the benefit side, we look at, first of all, the tuition fee income from international students, obviously very substantial. So that includes both the direct exports income, and that is the same as the Department for Education measures in its own education exports revenue statistics. But we also look at the wider indirect and induced economic impacts. So these are the knock-on economic impacts of that spending, that tuition fee spending, trickling through the rest of the UK economy. We also look at the income from non-fee expenditure. So this is the living costs. Again, that's something that the DfE also consider in their own statistics. Again, here we look at the raw exports income as in the raw direct level of spending, and then the additional indirect and induced impacts of that spending. And then last but not least, we also look at visitor income associated with friends and families visiting international students in the UK. Again, in terms of direct impact, but also the knock-on wider impacts throughout the rest of the UK economy. Okay, so that's the benefit side. On the public purse cost side, very importantly, we look at the cost of providing public services to international students or their dependents where still applicable. So for example, this could be the cost of healthcare, this could be the cost of education, of housing, this could be defense, public order and safety, diplomacy costs, you name it. Essentially, it's the full range of public service cost provision to international students being hosted in the UK. And in the bottom right, we show a core methodological improvement. So there's two key changes to the methodology, essentially, that we've made here, that we've amended over time. The first one is the breakdown by parliamentary constituency. So as before, the UK level results are broken down by parliamentary constituency. However, a key improvement for the first time here is that we now have data on international students' actual term time addresses. Previously, we used more generic census data as essentially a proxy of where international students live in each constituency. Now we have the actual data from HESA and JISC on that. So it's a much more precise measurement of where international students actually reside. So it provides a much more accurate picture and also, very importantly, more accurately accounts for satellite campuses. So, for example, the extent to which international students might be registered as an institution in Northern Ireland, but actually they're studying at the satellite campus in London. The second key methodological improvement, we get into that in a little bit, is we've used more up-to-date and more robust economic multipliers to measure the knock-on economic impacts. So the indirect and induced impacts of all of this spending. So they're more robust and much lower than previously. So that means that we can't really directly compare our previous estimates for 21-22 without some adjustments to those estimates which we've made. James will talk you through that in a little bit. Move on to the next slide, please, James. Okay, so what does the 24-25 cohort of international students look like? So here we've shown the total time series in terms of the very, very large growth of international students over time, all the way back to 2006-07, when there were 177,000 students. In 24-25, the number of first-year international students in the UK amounted to as much as 404,500 students that started HE qualifications in that year. So these are the first-year starters or the entrants. Within that, there were about 27,000 EU students. And as you can see from the chart, that's the light blue bit, that's been very steadily declining since Brexit. No surprises there, to be honest. And then there's 377,000 non-EU students. So obviously the non-EU market is now much, much more important in relative terms here because of the decline in EU students. In terms of the characteristics of those students, so over time, as probably is also not a surprise to many, international students have become more concentrated in London. So more and more international students studying at providers in London. It's about a third of all first-year international students living in London now. Again, we now have the term time address, so we can actually take account more accurately of the extent to which students live in London rather than being registered with providers elsewhere in the UK. So accounting properly for satellite campuses. In terms of country of study, for the first time now, India has actually overtaken China as the first, the sort of the primary country of origin. So we've got about 98,000 first-year students from India, another 98,000, slightly less, 97,500 from China. And then that's followed by Pakistan, Nigeria, and Nepal. So you can also really see the distribution of students by country of origin change over time. Speaking of changes over time, if we look at total student numbers, so last time we did the study was in 21-22, where we had about 377,000 international first-year students starting. Since then, overall, there's been an increase, as you can see. So now we have about 27,500 more first-year students starting compared to 21-22 overall. However, very importantly, there was a post-COVID peak at about 459,000 in 22-23, and then there has been a decline since then in more recent years. That's very much driven by recent immigration policy changes or the potential policy changes coming forward, but also increased international competition, where essentially we've moved from the big four destination countries for international higher education to now be the big 14 today. So there's both internal immigration policy changes in the UK, but also increased international competition from other countries. We get into more of the impact of that decline from international students between 22-23 and 24-25. We'll get into more of that later. There are, of course, further declines expected going forward. Again, increased competition, but also the various immigration white paper changes. So the shortening of the graduate route visa from 24 months to 18 months from next January. So it's very much coming up very soon. The potential international fee levy, which I know has been in the news again very recently, that's supposed to come in from August 2028. And then also most recently, the change in the basic compliance assessment requirements, the UK VI requirements from, I believe, last month, the first of last month when those came into place. So very much watch this space in terms of the number of international students coming in. Next slide, please, James. Okay, so moving on to our estimates of benefits for the 24-25 cohort. So on a per student basis over the entire study duration, the average benefit, the gross benefit per student is about £111,000. That's the middle column of that table. That differs significantly by study level. So for undergrad students, that's about 177,000 on average. And for postgrad, it's lower. It's about 83,000. That's primarily driven by the fact that undergrad students, of course, spend a lot longer in the UK during their studies. Postgrad top programs, master's programs are usually 1 year. Undergrad first degree are usually 3 years or 4 years in Scotland, of course. When we then look at the total impact across the entire cohort, so we add it all up across the 404,000 students, we get to 45.1 billion. That's the total gross benefit. We'll get to the costs in a bit. In terms of type of income, so about 22 billion of this is from fee income, and another 22 billion is from non-fee income. So approximately a roughly equal split between tuition fees and living cost expenditures of international students. And there's another approximately 1 billion, 0.8 billion here from visitor income. So much smaller, but still very important in terms of the amount of tourism revenue that international higher education brings into the UK. The 45 billion, this is the total direct and knock-on, indirect and induced impacts across the UK. If we look at just the direct export income, that's about 23 billion pounds. So basically that's just the direct revenues to the UK associated with fee income, non-fee income and visitor income. Obviously the DfE, you will have probably all seen the DfE last week, again, published the education export revenue statistics. I think their equivalent estimate was about 23.5 to 24 billion. So very, very similar overall in terms of the revenue that we estimate the direct revenue here and the DfE exports revenue statistics. In terms of study level split, as you can see, it's roughly equal between undergrad and postgrad. So approximately 22 billion of the total is associated with undergrad and 23 billion with postgrad. So that's the benefit side. Next slide, please, James. Okay, moving on to what are the corresponding costs of hosting international students. So again, this is the average per student. The average per student benefit, we had £111,000 per student. Against that, the average cost is about £12,000. So you can see already on a per student basis, the benefits very much dwarf the costs. So 12,000 on average cost. Again, for undergrad students, that's higher, £17,000. For postgrad students, that's about £9,000. Again, mostly driven by the study duration. The fact that the cost for undergrad students is higher than for postgrad students on average is despite the fact that postgrad research students can still currently bring dependents into the UK. So the dependence ban that was introduced in January 2024 that only applied to postgrad taught students, postgrad research students, so PhDs and MRes, they can still bring in their dependents. What has happened as a result of the dependence ban is quite interesting when you actually look at the Home Office statistics on this, is the number of dependents per non-EU student has declined from about 216 dependents per 1,000 non-EU students to 46. So you can see the dependence ban was very effective in what it was supposed to achieve here. So very, very significant decline in sort of the average number of dependents per 1,000 non-EU students here. In terms of the total public costs, so again, we aggregate across the cohort, that's £4.7 billion. In terms of study level, it's about £2 billion from undergrad students and slightly higher here, 2.6 billion for postgrad students. Again, that's partially driven by the fact that postgrad research students can still bring in their dependents, so there's a slightly higher cost. And then when we split this 4.7 billion by who the cost actually applies to, the vast majority, 4.2 billion, is associated with students themselves, the provision of public services to students themselves, and £500 million, so a very small proportion, is associated with the actual dependents. Okay, I'll hand over to James now to look at what the net impact figures are based on all of this.
Thank you, Micah. So if we combine these economic benefits and public cost figures on a per student basis, the net impact per student is around £100,000. In other words, every 10 international students generates around £1 million worth of net impact to the UK economy during their studies. This is around £160,000 per undergraduate student and £73,000 per postgraduate student. Again, as Micah mentioned, this is due to the difference in length of study for them. If we aggregate this across the entire 24-25 cohort, the net impact across over the duration of their studies is £40.4 billion, which is roughly split around half and half between undergraduate and postgraduate students. For the first time, we've also been able to put this in terms of employment, so in terms of the full-time equivalent jobs supported by the economic activities of international students, and that is around 287,000 full-time equivalent jobs supported across the UK economy, which is very significant. As Micah mentioned, we can't make a direct comparison to the previous results from our 21-22 study, just because we've made methodological changes, particularly to the multipliers, which are more robust but lower now. And therefore, what we've done is try to create what is, as far as possible, a like-for-like comparison. So we've taken the results for the 21-22 cohorts and used the current multipliers to create that like-for-like comparison. We've also then put those figures for 21-22 and 24-25 prices so that they're adjusted for inflation as well. So in terms of this like-for-like comparison, the net economic impact has increased by around £4 billion, which is 11%. Within that, the benefits have increased by £3.5 billion, which is due to this increase in the cohort size, and the public costs have actually decreased by about £600 million. This decrease in cost, despite the increase in the size of the cohort, is primarily due to COVID-related expenditure in 21-22, and as a smaller factor is also the reduced number of dependents as well that are brought in by postgraduate students due to the dependent ban, as mentioned by Micah. As Micah mentioned earlier as well, the number of first-year international students has declined quite significantly since 22-23, so right by around 12% or over 50,000 starters in that time. We're not able to say why that was exactly or what would have happened if the various policy changes hadn't come in. We don't know whether, in fact, the number of students would have increased beyond 22-23 numbers or whether that would have been the peak, regardless of recent policy changes. As Micah mentioned, there's also been increased international competition. But just to illustrate the difference in economic impact between 22-23 student numbers and 24-25 student numbers, what we've done is we've looked at what a kind of hypothetical estimate of what the impact would have been if 22-23 student numbers had been maintained in 24-25. That's just taking average per student figures by study level and just applying them to the size of the 22-23 cohort. So when we do that, we find that the impact would have been around £3 billion or 7% higher in 24-25 if 23 student numbers had been maintained, so around 43 billion compared to £40 billion. This, just to note, the 7% increase is slightly difference is slightly smaller than the 12% difference in students, just because there's been a slightly different slight change in the composition of the cohort, and there are relatively more undergraduate students starting in 24-25 who have a larger benefit associated to them due to their longer study duration. If we put this in employment terms, it's around 23,300 fewer full-time equivalent jobs supported by international students now compared to if the 22-23 cohort size had been maintained. Just to add to this, just to be very clear, this is a very high level hypothetical estimate of this, because we can't exactly work out what the impact of the effects are, but we think it's useful just to show what this change of student numbers might mean in terms of economic impact. We've also been able to break down the economic impact by region of residence. So what we're looking at here is the impact of students living in a region on the UK economy as a whole. And this is, again, based on the actual region of their residence, based on the new data that we've been able to obtain from PISA and JISC based on term time residence. What we see here is that there's an impact across the UK, but with a particularly strong impact in London, the South East, West Midlands, North West, and Scotland. We see quite a notably low impact, for example, in Wales and Northern Ireland. One particularly big change since our previous study is that the impact's become substantially more concentrated in London. So from 26% of the impact previously to 34% of the impact now. Part of that is just more students are studying at HE providers whose main campus is based in London, but also due to the methodological change that we've made, where we're better able to account for where students actually live. We're able to see that there are actually more students living in London who are studying at providers with a main campus outside of London. So that might be a provider in the Northeast with the London campus, for example, as well. So we're increasingly seeing this concentration of international students in London. We're also able to break down the results by parliamentary constituency as well. So here, again, importantly, what we're looking at is the impact of students living in a constituency on the UK economy. We're not able to look at the impact on the constituency itself. When we look at this across the 650 constituencies, the average impact is £62 million per constituency and £580 per member of the resident population. If we look at the table on the left, we can see that Sir Keir Starmer's constituency, Holborn and St Pancras, comes out top with an impact of around £1.2 billion, and that we estimate there are around 11,500 first-year international students living there, which is a very large number. We can also see that that 9 regions are represented in this list of top 20, and if you go down to the list of top 40, all 12 regions in the UK are represented. Around the top here, we also see a particular concentration of constituencies based in cities as well. One important thing to note is due to the better data that we're able to use this time, we see a much more accurate picture of where international students live, but this also means that the impact is actually much more concentrated in certain constituencies than we previously realized. So, for example, in the last study, around 5 constituencies had an impact of over £500 million originating from them, and that's gone up to 15. And at the other end, the smallest impact that we had in our previous study was around £2 million per constituency, whereas there are now 150 constituencies with an impact of less than £2 million as well. So we're seeing something which is much more concentrated in certain areas. Again, this is the impact on the UK economy as a whole, but you can imagine that a lot of the impact will be found in the constituencies where the students are living, and also around providers and their campuses as well. We've published an interactive dashboard which has where you can explore the results, and I'll just quickly show you how that works. The link is on the HEPI website as well. So we have this dashboard where you can see you can choose a constituency, and you can just see the results. So, for example, here we've got Holborn and St Pancras with an impact of £1.2 billion. I'll randomly choose a constituency of Makerfield. People might be interested in that one. It's got much smaller impact of £4 million and 35 international students. Another one that people ask about a lot is Clacton. Don't know why, but £2 million impact and 25 international students there. So let people browse that in their own time. We've also got a separate spreadsheet where you can download all the results. It's on the HEPI website. There's a link down here as well. Pass over to Rose.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to both of you for that whistle-stop tour through the details of the report. We did write to Keir Starmer to ask if he would like to comment on his constituency being the top of that list, but he didn't reply. I imagine he's been a little distracted the last couple of weeks. So I'm really thrilled to introduce our panel who will share their reflections on this report. So we're going to hear from Professor Sir Steve Smith, the UK Government International Education Champion. Then we'll hear from Professor Karen O'Brien, Vice-Chancellor and Warden at Durham University. And finally from Linda Cohen, Managing Director at Kaplan International Pathways, who supported this work. So kick us off, Sir Steve.
Thanks very much indeed. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to join you for the webinar. It gives us an opportunity, I think, to publicly recognise the incredibly important contribution that international students make to the UK. And that's why I want to state very clearly at the outset the UK government's position, which is an across-government agreement. The UK welcomes international students who meet the requirements to study here. We no longer have a target for student recruitment. Instead, our new international education strategy focuses on sustainable recruitment, prioritizing quality, student experience, and responsible recruitment. That position informs my work as the International Education Champion and the work of the departments that sponsor the International Education Strategy. This is because the UK government recognises and values the cultural and academic impact that international students make, as well, of course, as the economic contribution that we're discussing today. International students enrich our campuses, they broaden perspectives, they enhance the experience of all students. They bring fresh ideas, they challenge our thinking, and they strengthen the UK's world-leading research base. Our universities benefit from strong international ties, so much so that we've educated 59 of the current or recent world leaders. In that sense, international students are a critically important part of the soft power of the UK. But equally, we have to demonstrate the benefits of international students to the population who, after all, provide us with our social license to operate. And that social license is currently under a lot of strain. Let me start by commending this report by London Economics and to congratulate all involved for the detailed and transparent presentation of the data. I'd also like to note the changes made to the methodology, notably around the weighting of multipliers for indirect and induced effects of direct income. And of course, the difference between London Economics' figure for the financial contribution of international students and the data contained in the UK government's education exports reports relates to the inclusion of these indirect and induced effects in the London Economics report. The report demonstrates without any doubt that international students contribute highly to the communities in which they live and study. It estimates that the 2024-25 cohort of international students generated a net impact of 40.4 billion on the UK economy once public service costs are accounted for. But I found the constituency level breakdown to be absolutely fascinating, showing that international students in the 24-25 cohort make a £62 million net economic contribution to the UK economy per constituency. Now, crucially, and in light of my comments about social license, it's precisely these data that are, to me, the most politically significant in the report. It's one thing to talk about overall impact, but as Rachel McSween and Debbie McVitie have argued strongly in their recent Wonky piece, the key issue is showing how international students impact each part of the UK. I noted, for example, that the constituency in which I live, Exeter, which has the 19th largest net economic impact of all constituencies, here international students contributed 445 million net to the economy, some £4,200 per resident. Getting that local message out seems to me to be really important in the coming months and years. Across the UK, from Cardiff to Edinburgh and beyond, our universities offer something for everyone. The UK has a world-class higher education sector, 4 universities in the top 10, 16 in the top 100, alongside a wide array of high-quality institutions, which can offer a fulfilling and enjoyable experience to international students from around the world. So the benefits of a UK higher education can be enjoyed all around the UK, and the benefits similarly apply in nearly every parliamentary constituency. I mentioned earlier the International Education Strategy. One of its key ambitions is increasing the export target to £40 billion a year by 2030. Many of you will have seen the data released last week. This shows that data, which is the yardstick to measure progress against our ambition, is making good progress. The latest data shows that we're now only 3.3 billion away from meeting the annual exports target by 2030. So, in conclusion, the UK has a unique combination of academic excellence, historic reputation, and a truly international outlook. International students bring real benefits at home: investment, employer partnerships, world-class training, and stronger routes into jobs for UK learners, supporting both local economies and the national growth mission. The International Education Strategy places education at the centre of the UK's global engagement. And in my role as the International Education Champion, I'll continue to try and break down the barriers to making the UK the international home of opportunity. We'll continue to welcome international students, and to repeat, our strategy focuses on sustainable recruitment, prioritising quality, prioritising the student experience, and prioritising responsible recruitment. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I think it's really interesting that you touched on the importance of the local impact there and how we tell that story. It feels at the minute that we've got a very tentative level of support at the national level of politics. but there's a really enthusiastic level of report for universities regionally. If you read any mayoral combined authority growth strategy, universities will be mentioned in there scores of times. And I wonder how we get that regional enthusiasm for the higher education sector and push it back kind of towards Westminster and national governments. And I didn't know if you had any thoughts on how we can make this kind of a two-way street.
Well, I think the crucial thing is actually to demonstrate to voters, and everywhere, and that's going to be straightforward in the big urban conurbations. I think the challenge, Rose, is going to be what do we do in those constituencies with low economic contribution? It's also clearly, Rose, to make it obvious that the benefits are not just economic, they're cultural, they're benefits for the local population. There's a lot to do there, but given a new government coming in, let's hope that we can take the local to the national and thus change the kind of the tone of the discussion, which at the moment is a bit downbeat.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, I will hand over to Professor Karen O'Brien for her takeaways on this paper. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you very much. Very great pleasure to be here. Good morning to everybody. I'm going to speak from the perspective of a Vice Chancellor in one of the regions that Sir Steve has alluded to. I just want to start by saying I've just emerged from nearly 2 weeks of graduation ceremonies where we had this absolutely fantastic rainbow of international students shaking my hand, their parents coming to Durham Cathedral. We really cherish and value the international community that we create in Durham. And we know that that's greatly cherished by large numbers of our local community. And as Sir Steve alluded to, I think there is a new dynamic in play which makes this report particularly timely, and that has to do with the mayoral strategic authorities devolution and how we think about the economic benefits and the cultural contribution of international students in the region. So I really welcome this report. I welcome the fact that the methodology has been honed and refined, and this previous iterations of the report have already been really powerful and important to us in the Northeast in making the case for international students and against some of the policy changes that have had a deleterious effect on international student recruitment. And just to give you some idea, of the 400,000 new starters that the report identified in the 24-25 cycle, 15,000 were in the Northeast. Now, that doesn't sound like an enormous amount, but what you'll see in the London economic numbers is that that has an outsized impact on our region, truly outsized, about a £60 million impact. One of the constituencies, Central and West Newcastle, was listed there in the top 20 for economic impact. And Durham, which is a small city, the report cites a net impact of 426 million. So in a relatively deprived part of the UK, international students play an enormous role in the context of the universities here being anchor institutions. So I think having that evidence base and thinking about international students through that regional lens is a really important contribution that this methodology has made. And we continue to have what I think are very constructive dialogues actually with our mayor, with our local MP, and actually with our county council about how we can contribute to economic growth in the region and how international students play an important role. I think it's also important to recognise that the report signals the benefit of students coming here to the UK. So Steve's and the government's current international strategy places a lot of emphasis on transnational education. And in student number terms, that is now roughly similar to those in terms of numbers of transnational students that we have all over the world. As a UK, that's now roughly equivalent to numbers coming to the UK. And all of us in the higher education sector are going on these transnational education adventures. We've just started a new joint educational institute in China. And many universities have announced new campuses in India. These are good things to be doing, but they are risky, and the financial returns are very unlikely, in my view, to be anywhere near what we see from the impact of students coming to the UK. And I think the kind of acculturation process, if students are not coming to the UK, if we're not getting to meet them and they're not getting to meet us in country, are clearly going to be quite profoundly different. The £2.9 billion gap over the last 3 years that the report identifies, you're rightly, James, quite cautious about how you attribute that to policy changes, but also more broader geopolitical competition. We're a Russell Group university, so our big market is China. These are not students who are particularly influenced by post-study work visas, but they are students who are facing very, very challenging graduate labour markets in China. So they're choosing either not to come in larger numbers, or they're going to the excellent universities in the closer regions of Hong Kong and South Korea. And I'm very struck by the exponential growth as higher education superpowers in Hong Kong and South Korea and elsewhere in that part of the world. So we have got to be mindful of that escalating global competition and make sure that we continue to offer the very high quality UK education that is so prized by international students. It's never going to be enough to have the numbers. The numbers are really important, and we really appreciate being able to use this report. But clearly, this report needs to be the basis of an ongoing and mature conversation with our government and with our local authorities about the impact that students have, being honest about that impact on housing, particularly in a small city like ours, and on the NHS, on schools and everything else. And also about the benefits that students bring. Personally, and it's a personal view, I think we've spent a lot of time as a sector begging to have these numbers taken out of the net migration figures. If you look at what the Oxford Migration Observatory says about what's been happening in recent years, it is the case that a lot of students have come and stayed for longer. They are part of the population. I'm not sure that that's been a particularly productive line of argument. I think it's more important to recognise that we have a sophisticated UK population who really do understand the difference between students as migrants and other kinds of migration. And we had a survey that the Russell Group carried out a couple of years ago, which showed that generally people feel very positively about international students. We see that every time we have our Spring Festival in Durham. We see the local community coming together, very, very caring and very nurturing towards these guests from overseas, and really enjoying the interaction. So the more we can do, I think, to have that mature conversation about benefits, about friendships, and about a responsible approach, particularly to issues like local housing, the more I think we can seek to win the argument alongside the economic argument. So economic argument, robust, greatly appreciated, and I think the regional dimension is a hugely valuable part of this report. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Karen. And I will finally pass over to Linda. What do you make of the report, Linda, and how does this fit into the international student picture more broadly?
Thank you for that, Rose. And Rose, I'm also just going to own the fact I'm sporting such an amazing black eye, and I feel my professional reputation might be destroyed if I don't explain that I just fell over when I was running the other day. So, but it does look striking. But Rose, we were as Kaplan, obviously, this is the fourth time that we've sort of sponsored the report. The reason for why we thought it was really important to do it at this point in time is really linked into the point that Sir Steve kicked off with when he spoke. And that is the fact that obviously in the competitive world that we're in just now, we're seeing students having more and more choices and actually demonstrating they actually want to take the route of other choices than maybe what they've historically done. So as Kaplan as a global organisation, we're in that fortunate position that we work with universities in Canada, the US, here in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand. We also have our own transnational education campuses, big one in Singapore, smaller one in Hong Kong. And actually what that enables us to do is enables us to sort of see the movement of international students and where they're thinking about going, often before they actually get their visas to then travel. And I think what I would share is it's sort of the senior leadership team within Kaplan. A lot of what we're discussing just now is not so much around students going to our traditional Big Four. We're spending all of the time talking about the fact that that Big Four is now the Big 14 and is probably going to become the Big 15, the Big 20 in the future. So that's why I think this type of report is really, really timely, because it shows, in my view, how much the UK has the potential to lose because there are many, many other options out there for international students. So I think we were pleased to support it because it obviously gives a strong economic argument as to the value of international students for the UK. I will reiterate there are many, many other values and benefits of international students studying in the UK, but this is focusing on the economic side. I think what I would hope would happen with the report is that actually we take advantage of the fact we've broken it down to parliamentary constituency, and actually we can use the report to really help inform our messaging around the value of international students, not only in the constituencies that have universities and have higher education institutions, but what it does mean in terms of things like into the tourism, so the wider part of what international students often do when they're in the UK, and what happens when the relatives come and visit in the UK. So Rose, I'll finish at that point, but I think probably my ask for the sector is, how do we use this powerful information that we've got from London Economics to really refine and enhance the messaging that we can communicate around the impact this has in really every postcode around the world, every postcode in the UK and every region across the UK. But Rose, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. You sound very aligned with our potential new Prime Minister, talking about the benefits to every postcode. So maybe we should capitalise on that direction of travel. Okay, we are going to get straight into our Q&A. So if I can ask all of my guests to pop their cameras back on. We'll go for quite concise answers so we can get through a few questions, and don't all feel like you need to answer each question. So our first question is from Gareth Top. So Emma, if we can pop Gareth's microphone on, please, and go ahead, Gareth, and ask your question.
Sorry, I'm trying. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so just really shocked actually by the amount of cost that's attributed by the Exchequer to an international student studying in the UK. You sort of envisage them sitting on a university campus like where I am in Sussex, mainly drawing on the university's services on campus. I know some of them, of course, live in cities as well, but it's very hard to see unless they're attributing the costs of our defence budget, policing, all of that, which feels a bit OTT, but I wonder if others have reflections on the same.
Thanks.
Brilliant.
That's exactly what we're doing. Yeah, I'll jump straight in. Thanks, Rose. That's exactly what we're doing, Gareth. So we've previously, the criticism was always that international students cost a lot more than they bring in benefits, right? It was a key argument for Theresa May to even start the argument about net migration numbers and pulling international students in those. They have obviously remained in those numbers. So what we did here is we basically treated international students as an average member of the resident population. So we basically looked at all public costs associated with government spending, essentially. So we look at health, net of the immigration health surcharge. Obviously, international students pay for that. Look at education. There's quite a lot of defense in that. There's things like non-identifiable expenditure. Don't underestimate how large that is. That's, for example, the servicing of the national debt, which is very, very large. There's overseas expenditure on diplomacy, there's housing, environment, economic affairs. For example, during COVID times, when we did this last in 21-22, that in itself was thousands of pounds per member of the resident population. And that was basically things like Eat Out to Help Out, or the BBB, so all of the additional expenditure that the government made during COVID. So we have basically taken the very conservative approach, as in we've pulled the, as you said, over the top OTT costs, we've pulled all of them in to show that even if you pull all of that in, the benefit is still so much larger than public cost.
Really interesting. Thank you, Micah. Okay, we have a question from Johnny Rich. So Emma, if you could pop Johnny's mic on, go for it, Johnny.
Thank you very much. Karen has actually answered this already in what she was saying. I posted it moments before she started saying it. But I wanted to, because the international strategy makes the comparison between or urges greater investment in transnational education, I was wondering if we could reflect on the economic impact, the net economic impact of transnational education versus international students studying in the UK, because of course there's the costs to the public purse are lower for transnational, but the economic gains might be might be lower too.
Brilliant. Thanks, Johnny. I will also read out an anonymous question here that says, it's notable that places that do best financially tend to be regarded as quite progressive cities and towns. So, for example, Sir Keir Starmer's constituency comes top, whereas places like Clacton, which we saw, do much less well. So does the sector need to think more about pushing its core messages into those places that don't host as many international students? So we've got two questions there. If anyone would like to pick those up. Micah, do you want to answer that first one again? And Linda, you can come in on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. Nice to see you. The T&E one, that's a very important point. We obviously didn't include any T&E in our study, but the DfE, the exports statistics, the export revenue statistics that were published last week. So Sir Steve Smith has already said it. So the total revenue of education exports across all further education, higher education, T&E, etc., was approximately 37 billion export revenue. Within that, only about 3.6 billion is T&E. So only about 10%. So that gives you an idea of the scale of impact. So T&E is still a lot less valuable from an export revenue point or an economic point than it is when you consider international students actually being hosted in the UK. And that is, of course, very much driven by the difference in spending. So international students that do T&E abroad, none of that spending, very little of that spending comes to the UK. And that's the key difference. Obviously, can't really comment in any detail, but this is just based on the high-level statistics from the DfE because we didn't include T&E in ours. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Linda, did you want to pick up on that as well?
Actually, Rose, can I take the second question?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the really simple and short answer to the second one is yes. The slightly longer answer to that one is the reason why I would say that is I actually think to a certain extent it's not what's exciting about this information is not so much the cities and regions that are in, say, the top 10, the top 20. It's the middle, it's the lower. That's what I think is really powerful about how we can really focus in on those to then try and translate this into what does it mean for jobs? What does it mean for spending those? So I think that's what we really should be doing. It's much more around what's the smaller numbers because it's still a positive number.
I think that's really interesting. So I live in a constituency called Stroud, and we do not have very many international students, 10 according to the report, which is £1 million of economic benefit. But we'd really rather have that £1 million than not. So even though it's tiny compared to some of the others, I think it can still be recognised as beneficial. Steve, did you want to join in on that one?
Yeah, if I could go back to that first question for a second. The gross data, as Micah has said, shows that T&E is about 3 and a bit billion. Actually, most of that's schools. I think the amount of universities from memory is around 900 million, so it's a lot less. Two comments, really, if I can quickly, Rose. Firstly, the T&E push is very much because that's what other governments are talking to us about. Well, I've done over 500 engagements with other governments, and what they say to us is, we'd like UK quality, but we'd like it at a price point that makes it a more inclusive activity. And we see the way in which universities are responding to that. We expect actually T&E to overtake number of students coming to the UK. It's very near at the moment. So that's the first point. Second point is the returns to the university of T&E are a lot lower. We look at their various business plans, and I suspect the net benefit to the institution is something between 10 and 20% of the amount that they gain from educating an international student in the UK. But also, of course, Rose, there's that point of the migration issue, which is actually causing such a lot of concern. Maybe that changes as net migration goes down, but nonetheless, we think T&E is going to grow enormously in the next few years.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question, and I think Paul might have gone whose question it is, so I'm going to read this out, and it picks up on what we've just been talking about. So Paul says, the report supports the case that Sir Steve and Karen have made about the importance of sustainable international student recruitment for the UK. But even if that case is accepted by government, it is routinely being drowned out by the perceived imperative to get immigration numbers down. with the result that UKVI is refusing visas at a level which is causing many universities to cut back significantly on international student recruitment. And what can the sector do to counter that? Karen, I wonder if you might answer this one.
Yes. Okay. Well, I mean, helpfully, obviously, net migration figures have reduced very significantly this year, and they've reduced in a lot of Europe, actually, not France, but Germany and elsewhere. So we are seeing, a combination of border control, visa control, but also, as I alluded to earlier, I think, there just are some very good reasons why families in India, China, and elsewhere in the world are not choosing to send their young people quite so far abroad. So I think one of the stories we can tell is that this is reducing of its own accord, whether we interfere or not, and it probably doesn't require a very drastic intervention. I know that's not an easy message, but we're in a more helpful context than we were in. But otherwise, I think we just have to kind of continue to make the case for a kind of responsible and managed approach to what we're doing. There have been cities, Nottingham is a very good example, where there's been a kind of both university and city kind of compact around student housing, perceived pressure on services, perceived and real, I'm sure. So I think there is a lot more we can do just to kind of underline that message that this isn't just kind of unregulated pressure. You see it in the tourism industry, don't you? That there's been this discourse in recent years of over tourism. I think there are people in some cities and some parts of the country that thinks that there's over studentism, and we have to be honest and fair with our residents about that. And just get to a degree of maturity about those conversations as well.
Great, thank you. Steve, did you want to comment on that question?
Yes, just briefly. I mean, basically echoing what Karen's just said. I mean, the key thing for me, the one thing the sector can do, and it's kind of the mantra I've been going on about for the last couple of years, is make sure that, and it's that word, responsible recruitment. The sector, there have been some issues that we've had to deal with that have been really problematic. And the rise of MRESs, some agents, the whole issue of English language, asylum seeking. There are arguments, and I think this goes to the point, Rose, about those constituencies that don't have much economic benefit. And there is an issue that some people are worried in the country that in some institutions, student recruitment is a route to migration. And what we have to do is make sure, and that's why the words were twice in my comments, responsible recruitment is the key, and make sure that the sector adheres to the rules and to the spirit behind the rules. That makes all our jobs a lot easier in arguing for the benefits across the country, not just the places where the economic benefits are greatest.
Thank you. I'm going to take a couple of final questions. So I've got Rhiannon Ely. So Emma, if we could unmute Rhiannon, please. And then I've got a technical question from Candela that I will come to next. Rhiannon, what's your question?
Hello. So is my microphone on? Sorry, I've got notifications. Thank you very much. It was a very interesting report. I'm really glad I came to hear the findings, but obviously this focuses on the economic benefits and costs. And I come from a position of kind of really worrying about the non-financial costs, but especially to the students. So I live and work in a low diversity area of the UK, and I train nurses. So they don't live just in the university, they're going out on their clinical placements in our surrounding counties. And the experiences that they have are not entirely positive. And actually, we do have many reports of racism within those practice settings. And similarly, our clinical practice partners have told us that they struggle to understand how to navigate cross-cultural communication, education, and healthcare, which is fundamentally different and delivered differently in the UK. And so I have a concern about focusing on the fact that international students bring in money, which is certainly what our institution does. It sort of marginalises those racialised experiences. And I think to kind of come back to one of Steve's points about responsible recruitment, is it responsible to continue recruiting if there is a lack of organisational and social readiness?
Brilliant, thank you. And perhaps Linda and Karen, I can ask you to think about that one for a moment while we hear from Candela, who has a technical question for the London Economics team. Candela. Oh, maybe we can't hear you. Okay, I will read out your question. Have the International Foundation Programme students been accounted for? So Michael, I'll come back to you on that one. Okay, Linda and Karen, this, if international students are coming here and having challenging experiences, what do we do about that?
So Rose, I would probably just say, first of all, I actually completely agree with that question. And actually, it is Kaplan. I always get a bit nervous about sponsoring this report because it focuses so much on the economic argument, but the economic argument is so powerful. But I'm always going to keep reiterating it's only part of what we should be discussing. So do echo that. I resonate in terms of what was being said, but what I would say is, for all those stories you hear, I hear so many other stories about the kindness, the positive interaction that you hear. So it is balanced out there. But I think for a lot of providers, you see the interaction between international students and non-international students in your education environments. That for me is all about preparing people for the future, preparing people for global careers, preparing people for global success. So again, I'm just keep trying to take it the value to UK students as well as international students. So I would say that point and hand over to Karen.
Yeah, it's a really profound question, and as I said earlier, we're only looking at what one half of the one dimension of what it means to be a country that is really attractive to international students, and I do think that's right. That's a good reason why Micah and others have costed in the quite high social costs of international students coming here. We do, on occasion, I'm afraid, interact with our local constabulary. There's a lot with the county council, the police. There's a lot that you have to do when you're bringing large numbers of people into a community, and there will be infrastructure calls on what you need to do to make sure that goes really well. Otherwise, clearly it is incumbent on us as universities to work with our communities. And as Linda says, there are just so many stories of absolutely wonderful interactions and international students volunteering in schools, but continuing to enable that as a university and a community is really, really important.
Great, thank you. So we are going to wrap up in a moment, but I wanted to finish by asking our panelists, so Linda, Karen and Steve, looks like we've got a new and incoming government, who may have a different take on this. So remembering that immigration is, I'm sure, going to remain a really important topic to the electorate. If you had one ask or one tweak you'd like to see from the new government in 30 seconds, what would that be? And Karen, I'll go to you first.
Okay, could they please take the international student levy off the table? It's madness in a sector that is visibly shrinking in front of our eyes and will have reduced capacity to recruit international students. We are all very committed to maintenance grants for home students. There has to be another way to do this, but this levy is absolute insanity.
Linda.
Can they keep saying, and Sir Steve, you said it at least 3 times, but can they keep saying that they welcome international students? Because it does get lost internationally. Social media acts against it. So I think that would be my ask, to keep repeatedly saying that they welcome international students, and then hopefully policies that also support it. That was 2.
Thank you. And Sir Steve.
Well, hopefully I'll still be working for the new government. So the one thing I would actually want, having thought about it, is policy stability. Interestingly, when I go around the world, the thing that other markets talk about is the damage that change in policy gives. So a more welcoming policy, yes, but equally consistency in policy and making available all the data that government has so that institutions can exercise responsible recruitment.
Yeah, I think that would be really incredibly welcome. And obviously, we are yet to see the impact of the levy if that does come in. So thank you all for your time, speakers. Really appreciate your insights and your expertise. Thank you to my colleagues, Emma and Carol, who make this happen. And of course, a massive thanks to Kaplan for supporting this work and London Economics for doing the work, because we really couldn't publish this without you. So I hope everyone manages to stay cool for the rest of the afternoon. Thanks very much, folks. Bye-bye.